Welcome to a history of the first 30 years of High Point Church. Today's magnificent church had humble beginnings that go back to a time when there were no Bible churches on the west side of Madison. Christian families wanted a place to worship God and bring the good news of Jesus Christ to people in the area. A bold servant of God named Paul Stewart became the energy behind establishing a new church. The Stewart family and others had been driving to Faith Baptist Church in Monona. With the blessing of their pastor, Warren Stewart, Paul and Helen began a Bible study in their Middleton home in the spring of 1960. Soon they outgrew the Stewart home, and in July, the first Sunday service was held in the Middleton Insurance Building. Reverend Leslie Nee guided the fellowship, which was incorporated as Middleton Baptist Church on November 2nd, 1960. The next spring, 24 people were installed as charter members. In March 1961, Richard Krenz was called to be the pastor and was told the church would move his family from Iowa. What he didn't know was that move would be in one of Harold Ryman's landscape trucks. Somehow, Pastor Krenz, Arlene, and children Jeff and Joanna survived that journey. Daughter Julie was born later. The next step was to build a house without partitions to be used as a chapel in Sachs Woods. Soon, this location, too, was outgrown. When an executive from Oscar Mayer loaned $12,000 to purchase a different lot from a lady named Annie Kirch, partitions were put in the house and it was sold. A new church would be built at 6101 University Avenue. By the fall of 1962, the first service was held in the basement. The air was so smoky that people could hardly breathe, and the furnace belched in the middle of Pastor Krenz's sermons. Minor inconveniences for this happy congregation that finally had a permanent place of worship. By March 1963, the building was finished, and a worship service was held in the sanctuary. A gym was constructed in 1968 with classrooms added later. The Kirch House in the background was used for youth activities. Among the workers were Harold Ryman, the Davenports, Jerry Eastman, and Bob Morick. John Klingbeil brought the watermelon. 1969 brought Dan, Carolee, Rob, and Wendy Hayden to town. Dan had graduated from Dallas Theological Seminary and needed a job. Once again, Harold Ryman played a part. Carolee was his niece, so Harold suggested that Dan come and work for his landscaping company. At the same time, Middleton Baptist was hoping to add a teen and campus pastor. Dan was a perfect fit. And he was respected by the older folks of the church, like Delbert Thompson as well. After 13 years of fruitful ministry, in 1974, Pastor Krenz was called to Emmanuel Baptist Church in Wausau. Hearts were heavy to lose such a beloved pastor. But once again, God provided, for he had been preparing Pastor Dan, already a gifted Bible teacher, to become Middleton Baptist's second pastor, a job he held until 1977 when his family left for Fort Wilderness. Richard Sisson was called to be the church's third pastor. He and Carol, along with children Lisa, Rick, and David, moved from Chicago in November of 1978. Although their steep driveway was not a good match for Wisconsin winters, for many Christmases they welcomed a congregation into their home. Thus, the first 3 decades saw only 3 senior pastors. Soon there were more building projects. A fellowship hall used as a sanctuary was completed in 1980. Frank Campbell volunteered as general contractor. A new entrance and foyer were added in 1982. Building projects provided fellowship for the men, as well as the women who prepared meals. Of course, there was lots of watermelon. It took work to keep the church clean. Early custodians were Sam and Mary Davenport, Russ and Gloria Hildebrand, and Eric Bakken. Bob and Marion Barr volunteered countless hours doing upkeep. Then there was Tim Klingbeil, whose dates with Sheila consisted of cleaning the church. But the church was never just about the building. Much more was going on inside and outside its walls. On the first deacon board in April 1962 were Paul Stewart, Robert Norton, Sam Davenport, Harold Ryman, Donald Johnson, and Warnie Pickering. There were other deacon boards through the years. Deaconesses oversaw the serving ministries of the church. Sending missionaries to spread the good news of Jesus Christ was a priority. Here are just a few, some of whom are still ministering at home and abroad.
We'll be caught up in a chariot of clouds. We'll be caught up in a chariot of clouds. Like Elijah of old, to the mansions of gold. We'll be caught up in a chariot of clouds. In faith at last we'll turn to sight as heaven looms.
Pastor Dan's ministry to the UW brought international students who could take the gospel back to their countries. Chinese students sat right up front. Nate Mirza carried on the international ministry to Indonesian students and Nigerian students, including Ben and Rose Datiri. Growing in Bible knowledge was important, so in 1973 the church began the Middleton Bible Institute, directed by Dan Hayden. Here is Bob Jacobson teaching a Bible geography class, and Pastor Krenz teaching biblical hermeneutics. Yes, that's Ben Peterson in the striped shirt. When he and Brother John were not wrestling in the Olympics, they attended Middleton Baptist Church. Pastor Sisson introduced an evangelism class that helped people gain confidence in witnessing to others. In 1981, Jim Tanner became the discipleship and evangelism coordinator. In 1984, the church became a center for Institute of Christian Studies through Columbia Bible College and later Trinity Seminary. Gary Sequest was its first director. When Dwayne Matthews joined the church as youth pastor in 1975, he encouraged drawing up plans for a day school. The first administrator of the new Middleton Christian School was Tom Carter, who also drove the van around the lake to pick up students. Teachers were Mary Syrocton, Debbie Zainfinig, and Linda Rohn. There have been many more teachers through the years. To guide them were administrators Dwayne Matthews, George Walker, and Dwight Chappell. Rick Sweatman also led the school for a year. Secretary Karen Gehrman held it all together. Harold Ryman bought uniforms and basketballs. Paul Costanzo coached one of the early teams. And there were cheerleaders. Pioneers in the library were Glenn Robertstad, Helen Campbell, and Donna Ludeking, shown here with their spouses. Longtime workers were Vrana Manor and Claudia Tadovich, among many others. In 1966, the church was chartered as an Awana Club. Scott Hodman led the pioneers for a while, and Doug Roberts guided the Powells. Many others have helped children learn Bible verses and develop good character.
Triumphant is the song, Jesus is coming to right everyone.
In the late 80s, Nana Cook became the children's education director. Vince Burke was hired as youth pastor in 1980. Youth ministry took a new approach when Todd Craig came on board. One thing that remained the same was that they always had fun, and many remained lasting friends.
And in this glorious train are millions, saints and angels, heaven's armies. Oh, how awesome is the great and grand display of power invincible of Christ the Lord.
Who could forget the green bus that drove youth groups to camp, picked up college students, and brought teams to their games? Adults had fun too. Was this the Thanksgiving banquet when Lola Brunzell stood on a chair to mash potatoes? Some from the 1960s stayed in touch. Women were often called upon to serve meals and take tickets. The men had their own events. There were golf outings and coon hunts, followed by chili suppers. Jimmy Webb and Pastor Krenz made ice cream. There were camp retreats. For a while, there was a young married couples group. Primetimers worked hard at Camp Forest Springs, but they had fun too. An active group was the Seasoned Singles. In the mid-'80s, John Check became pastor for the younger singles. Bob Kempen was blessed by his compassion. Pastor Ken Stoll was hired to oversee care groups. The church had many picnics. Sometimes lake baptisms were combined with ice cream socials. A big event was the church's 25th anniversary in 1985. Here are a few highlights.
For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the day. Jesus is coming, though we know not when.
The church was blessed with musical talent, led first by choir director Helen Stewart, then Esther Klingbeil, and finally Laura Dvorak, under whose direction the choir sang at a Sandy Patty concert. Enjoy the faces of some of the other musicians.
If you know him not, then let there be no hesitation. Trust him as your Lord and Savior now without delay. By his grace and mercy you can be a new creation, and be ready then to meet him that day. Jesus is coming, though we know not when. Yes, he is coming. Jesus is coming again. Jesus is coming again. Jesus is coming again.
Here's the choir you never saw. Volunteers, such as sound technicians, were important. Caring people staffed the nursery. People put together newsletters and stuffed bulletins. Sunday school teachers faithfully prepared lessons and also taught Bible school.
Say, friend, will you be ready? Jesus is coming again. If you know him not, then let there be no hesitation.
Workers were supported by secretaries such as Joan Morick and Lola Brunzell. And everyone was encouraged by Bev and Doug Davenport, charter members who had the longest span of time at the church. Just as building projects had been exciting for Middleton Baptist, so was the construction of High Point Church. Land on Old Sauk Road was purchased and prayed over in the fall of 1990. Construction continued for a year under the guidance of Jim Vincent, Bernie Roos, Bob Ames, and others.
He is coming. Jesus is coming again. Jesus is coming again. Jesus is coming again. Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. Jesus is.
Then came the laying of the cornerstone. One last service was held at Middleton Baptist, and then it was time to make the walk to the new church.
If you know him not, then let there be no hesitation. Trust him as your Lord and Savior now without delay. By his grace and mercy you can be a new creation. And be ready then to meet him that day. Jesus is mine.
On September 1st, 1991, the first service was held at High Point Church. A new chapter in the church's history had begun. Many things have changed at High Point Church, but one thing has not. The church still preaches the gospel of grace, that salvation is found in Jesus Christ, the one true shepherd of his sheep, who alone is worthy of our worship and praise. To him be the glory today, tomorrow, and forever.
Jesus is coming. Jesus is